So we're going to read from Joshua chapter 3. Now this is a text taken in the part of Israel's history. We've been walking through the Old Testament through the fall and studying it on Wednesday nights and mornings as the Israelites went from Egypt to the wilderness. You remember the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston, or the Prince of Egypt, the Disney film, right? That whole experience. And they're right on the verge of moving into the Promised Land on a whole new world. And here's what the Bible says about some of that experience in Joshua chapter 3. I'll just read it from here. Joshua was up early and on his way from Shittim with all the people of Israel with him. He arrived at the Jordan and camped before crossing over. After 3 days, leaders went throughout the camp and gave out orders to the people. When you see the covenant chest of God, your God, carried by the Levitical priests, start moving. Follow it. Make sure you keep a proper distance between you and it, about half a mile. Be sure now to keep your distance, and you'll see clearly the route to take. You've never been on this road before. And then a little bit later, after God gives Joshua some orders for this, what the people are to do, Joshua then turns and addresses the people after God has spoken to him. Joshua addressed the people of Israel. Attention, listen to what God, your God, has to say. This is how you'll know that God is alive among you. He will completely dispossess before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, Perizzites, Girgasites, Amorites, and Jebusites. That's a lot of ites. And then he says something very, very interesting. He says to put your feet in the water first, and then you'll see God move. And in fact, what he says God will do is God will hold back the waters of the Jordan River and allow them to cross. And we'll come back to that in just a moment. So they're ready. They're moving over to the Promised Land. It's a whole new world for them. And the truth is, as followers of Christ, as people at some place in this journey, we live in a whole new world. I shared yesterday during our church conference that research continues to show that the number of people who call themselves secular or spiritual but not religious, that's categorized as the nuns. That is, what religion are you? And they say, none, I'm spiritual but not religious. Those numbers are growing instead of getting small. And we live in a whole new world because of that. Remember 40s and 50s, it seemed like all you had to do to open the door of a church was to open the doors and families and children would come flocking to church. It's not that way anymore. And requires us to have a unique response to a different situation. And I shared yesterday 4 questions that maybe we ought to be thinking about as we enter into this new land that God has called us into. Number 1, why do we do what we do? Why? We're called to be disciples of Christ. It's there at the top of the inside of your bulletin. To make disciples of Christ for the transformation of the world. Shouldn't that be at the heart of what we do? Think what the world would be like if more people were like Jesus in the world than some of the things we lament about every day. Secondly, who is in our community? Who are you listening to? Go to Mimi's. Go to one of the other restaurants. Go to the places where you meet the folks, the bowling alley, the recreation games. Listen to what people are talking about. What's breaking their heart? What's giving them joy? What are their hopes and dreams? And maybe you just have to listen to members of your own family to find out some of those things. A third question, who's not here? I don't mean the people that used to come and worship here that don't come anymore. I include them, of course. But who are the people in our community that doesn't know the power and presence of the grace of God in their lives? Who is not here? And how are we bending ourselves but not breaking? How are we shaping and changing how we do ministry of all kinds in this place to speak the language of the goodness of God in one in which they will understand. And when we do that, you know what's going to happen, don't you? We are going to what? Change. We are going to change. Now I think about Bruce's retelling of the history. 4 different physical structures that someone called a church. Can you imagine the changes that went through those people for those almost 2 centuries as they adapted and reached out and ministered and received and welcomed their community over all those years? The text I just read is about the Israelites as they are ready to enter the promised land. They've been in the wilderness for 40 years, somehow paying their dues, but also getting ready and being prepared to enter this place God had given them. There are challenges before them. There's a bunch of ites before them. And there's this promise. And first, God sends these leaders to go out and tell them to get ready, to get up. And when you see that the Ark of the Covenant goes into the middle of the river to get ready to move across the river and begin to move into this whole new land. And what does they say? We've never been here before, don't they? Isn't that what they said? They said, be ready because we've never been here before. We live in a landscape, a cultural landscape that we've never been in before. But then I see something really cool that is said to the people. They said, Joshua said, God will move when you put your feet in the water. Now, get this. Usually the Jordan River is not that deep. But at certain times of the year, when the spring floods come, it's deep and it is wide. And so picture this scenario. You have all of these priests carrying this huge, big, bulky Ark of the Covenant that represents the presence of God for the people. And you can see them standing at the edge of the river, roaring with a flooding kind of scenario. And you hear, they're looking at Joshua going, are you sure we can do this? Right? Are you sure we can do this? And Joshua says, remember what God said. Now, I have a friend of mine, when we were shared about some of these questions I just shared with you, who's a pastor, who's looking at himself retiring in a very few short years. And he said to me, in all honesty, he said, I don't know if I have the energy to be the pastor of a congregation that has to take on these new challenges. And what he was saying to me honestly is, I don't know if I can change. He says, I would prefer to go back to the way it used to be. I don't know if at the end of my ministry I have the energy to take on these challenges. How honest. And maybe sometimes you feel that way. The change. Personal change. Oh. So there they are at the river. And you can see them. Maybe one of them is like my friend who's saying, I can't carry this ark across this river all by myself. That's what it feels like to me. It feels exhausting. How can I carry it across myself? So he looks over and yet maybe it's my friend at the same time who's saying, I can't do it by myself. But in a moment of knowing his sacred calling, he lifts his foot. And when he does it, he turns and he sees every one of the other priests with him lifting their foot at the same time. 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, then 6, then 7, then 8, then 9, 10, 11, 12. Priests step into the waters by faith. God hasn't moved yet. But they step into the waters, and what happens? God holds back this roaring river. And the people of Israel go from the wilderness to the promised land. And in fact, the text says they're supposed to be like half a mile from the covenant. So can you imagine how wide the river is being held back? But it doesn't happen unless the priests first do what? Step into the water. No guarantees, no certainty. But once their feet step into the water, then they're part of a miracle. And isn't that the same for us? In an uncertain time, in an uncertain place, no guarantees, no expectations. Maybe that is what God is asking us to do too. People who carry this tradition of faith that goes all the way back to 1802. God is saying, I'm not calling you backwards. You look at this book, God never called His people backwards. Always forward into a God-given future. And that is where God is calling us even now. Saying to you and to me, wherever you are in your journey, would you take that step and get your feet wet and then discover how God will move and do amazing things? That's the question for us. As we think about how we use our time, how we prioritize our time, how we make this an important time for ourselves and our family, as we think about how we want to use our gifts and our talents to make the love of God real in the world, how we want to write our checks when that time comes to support ministry, how we want to sacrifice so someone has food. God says, I know it feels uneasy and I know it feels uncertain, but take this step. Get your feet wet and watch what I will do.